Well, hello there. The topic that I'm talking about in today's video is it's a really big one, and as I was just processing through everything for the past couple days leading up to this, I was kind of thinking that this probably won't be the last video that I make about this. In fact, all these topics I think are pretty free game to making a couple videos about. But this one specifically goes pretty deep. Everyone in the eating disorder space develops a certain type of relationship with food, and it's not the same for everybody, but there is a certain level of unhealthiness that, of course, is associated with an eating disorder. That's what, I mean, it's in the name, right? Eating disorder. It's a disordered eating pattern. I'm gonna break down kind of how I started viewing food as I started to go deeper and deeper into anorexia, and also how I was able to kind of get out of that unhealthy mentality. Basically, how I was able to kind of reform and reshape my relationship with food. Now, if you're watching this and you don't have an eating disorder, if you haven't had an eating disorder, maybe you're probably honestly thinking like, well, what relationship with food, what does that even mean? Paired with an eating disorder is just a very sort of intentional relationship that someone can have with food. And if you haven't been in it, then it's really hard to understand. And it's not the same thing as just saying, oh, I love food so much. No, it's not like that. It's this unhealthy relationship that develops with specific types of food or just with food in general. And I'm gonna explain as I kind of break down what I got into when I went into anorexia. Also, quick side note, I'm not gonna go into my full story, so if you are confused with kind of what I'm saying or as I'm jumping around, because I'm gonna be kind of not speeding through everything, but like just going over kind of the basic level of what happened with my relationship with food. If you want to watch my full story, go on the description below or click up in one of these corners, I forget which one. But in this or that down below, whichever one pops up on the screen, I'm gonna go, I'll link to my full story basically where I go through like kind of everything that happened. Let's talk about how to find peace with food. This process is probably gonna be different for a lot of different people. This is what worked for me to find peace with food, to get out of the obsessive mentality that I had with food. This is how I got out of it, and it's not gonna be the same for every person. So I want you to take this and maybe apply it to yourself. But I want you, as you're watching this, keep the whys in mind. Like, why did this happen to me? How can this happen for you? How can I apply this to my situation? All those questions. Looking back and thinking about where I was and where I am now and what it took for me to get to a healthy spot, I noticed patterns. If you kind of go into a regression, you can kind of see similarities that happen between the first time and the second time and use that as kind of a breakdown for eating disorders and anorexia. And that's what I've been doing for the past couple weeks, or for the past couple years. And that's what I did when I was thinking about this specifically, my peace with food. And so there are a couple patterns that got me to a healthy spot to get to that peaceful spot. Number one was getting to a healthy weight. So bottom line, probably the most essential thing that got me out of an eating disorder and got me into a healthy relationship with food was getting to the natural weight that I needed to be at. I mentioned this before, and I'll say it time and time again, so I'm sorry if I'm beating a dead horse here, but for me, there was this physical mental switch that just flipped when I got to a certain weight. And I think it was around like maybe 130 for me. I'm 5'10", so 130 pounds for me. After I got above that, it was like my brain switched and I started to be able to see food in a completely different way. Okay, so number one is, and this is what my doctors helped me do, was get to that healthy spot with weight. And again, all this is going to take time. Okay, it's not just overnight stuff. Again, like I said before, this all started in junior high, and it took until the middle of college for me to develop that healthy relationship. Number two, processing with professionals. I had a nutritionist, a counselor, therapist, and a physician with me pretty much all along the way. Different people in those positions at different times, but pretty much I had maybe through the whole thing, like through from junior high to college, probably the physician and the therapist or the counselor that were with me. The nutritionist was junior high, but those three people really helped me process who I was and help process food. And I can say without professional help like that, it would have taken me probably a lot longer to heal, a lot longer to recover, and a lot longer to develop a peaceful relationship with food. So getting to a good weight, processing with professionals, and number three, being asked questions about who I was the entire way. So Consulting or talking with and being with professionals is huge, like the entire time. But when I step back and ask myself, well, what about the professionals? What about being with a counselor or a therapist really helped me? It was me learning to understand myself, learning to understand who I was, who this eating disorder was kind of overshadowing. And again, I'm going to try to explain this as best I can, but really, the more and more I started to understand myself, understand what I loved doing, and understand my passions, who I was, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to be, it was all a part. And again, this is as I'm gaining weight, as I'm working with nutritionists, therapists, physicians. As I started understanding myself more and more, I started realizing that I didn't want to focus on food as much as I was. I didn't have energy for that. I didn't have time for that. I wanted to be this other person who I was discovering myself. A big part of that was me talking to myself, spending time talking about who I was, asking myself who I was, and also being asked by those professionals or friends or people I trusted, just talking with them about who I was. Your eating disorder wants you to focus on food, but the more you start to focus on yourself, detached from food, away from food, the more that the thoughts of food will start to detach themselves. Another thing, and this happened during my time in college, but it was huge. This was a game changer for me. Whenever I started to think about food, instead of running away from that thought or just like letting it take over my mind, I what typically would happen is I would think about food and I would just accept it, right? I would just say, okay, this is what I'm thinking about. I'm just gonna go with it because it's what I want to do. Because I was learning more about myself, learning more about what I actually wanted to do, instead of just letting it take over or like running and hiding from those thoughts, I confronted them. It felt like I was confronting somebody else because I was starting to push back against this eating disorder, asking myself, why am I thinking these things? Do I want to think these things? And after asking myself those two questions, the answer was no. I did not want to think about those things because again, I saw the way out. I saw another way that I wanted to be, and I knew how much time and energy was taking away from me to think about all those things. So I said, no, I don't want to think about these things. I don't want to worry about food. And again, in terms of like where I was in recovery during that time, which kind of coincides with my ability to really think those thoughts, it was towards the later end of my recovery, where I had to be in a good enough position mentally and physically to be able to confront those thoughts by myself. But it had to be me. Like it had to be myself making those decisions for me to choose to develop a healthy relationship with food, a peaceful one. So this is kind of at that halfway point where I would eat a cupcake, I would eat half a cupcake and throw the other half away and think like, that's good enough. I decided to put myself out there. And I would say back then I was not a risk taker. As I'm learning more about myself, I'm actually realizing that I am more of a risk taker. I own a business with a friend of mine, and in that business relationship, I've learned that I'm much more of a risk taker than she is. She is much safer than I am, and that's necessary to build a business. But all I have to say, I learned, or I decided to push myself to start taking risks with food because I was always so afraid. I was always so afraid of eating anything high calorie or anything in my restricted list in my mind. So I would fight against those thoughts of, you can't have this. Whenever a thought would come into my mind like that, like, you can't have that, I would ask myself, why? Why can't I have this whole cupcake? Why can't I have this whole thing of ice cream that everyone else is eating? Not because everyone else is eating it, but because I want to have the whole thing. I started asking myself these questions. I started jumping out, started taking risks, basically, eating more food than I had before just to see what happened. And you know what happened? A lot of good things. I would eat the whole cupcake and I would just sit there and be like, okay, I'm fine. I'm good. And then there were pushbacks, of course, to maybe restrict the next day because I had eaten that thing. And I just let myself take in that small victory and say, tomorrow I'm just gonna eat normal. I'm gonna let myself celebrate this small victory by taking in what I wouldn't have before. I'm not gonna restrict anything, but I'm probably not gonna eat excessively tomorrow. So I did not restrict by eating something I normally wouldn't have, but I also did not like overindulge then the next day, which was an honest part of the healing process. I let myself accept that whole cupcake as a victory, and I kept on moving, taking one step at a time. Now, this last thing, I really don't want to be taken out of context because it has the potential to be. And this thing is not the answer for everybody. So I don't want this to get confused by me saying that it worked for me. I'm not saying that this is going to be the thing for everybody. Let me just explain and I'll break it down, all right? What I would say sped up completely the process of me finding peace with food was lifting weights. Before you go start deadlifting, like Larry Wheels deadlifting 900 pounds, lifting weights became a stress reliever for me. So before, during junior high and through high school, my food became my way of kind of relieving stress. Looking back, I realize that now. It became my control. When I started lifting weights, weights allowed me to put that stress onto something else. And when that happened, I started being able to look at food in a completely different way. The more I started relieving stress through that means, the more I started picturing food as an essential building block of who I was. Food was becoming the fuel to allow me to do all of the things that I wanted to do in life. Instead of it becoming the main source of my attention, it became a means for me to achieve everything else. So instead of, I'm trying to verbalize this as best I can. Instead of food being the focus for everything in my life, food became the thing that allowed me to focus on everything else that I wanted to. So what was it about lifting that for me turned things around? One, it was the quick concept that in order to get stronger, bigger, and better at that thing, which I loved because it allowed me to relieve a lot of stress, I had to eat food. I had to eat a lot of food. And if I didn't, I was just wasting my time. And so at that point in time, I had to choose between, well, do I want to keep on worrying about food, or do I want to focus on all these other things that I feel like are a part of me? And I chose to start focusing on all of those other things. Again, it wasn't all just like, oh, right away, don't worry about food anymore. But it was this whole process of working towards focusing and zoning in on all these other things rather than just worrying about food all the time. Oh, I know it's a lot. Again, all this is not going to be the same for every person, but stuff like this gets me fired up, man. All right, so looking back at all the stuff that I went through, these steps for me to develop a peaceful relationship with food, to be at peace completely with food. Number one, getting to a healthy weight. Number two, working with professionals, getting professional help. I can't remember if these are in the same order or not, so forgive me if they're not. Number three, confronting thoughts about food rather than running away from them. Number four, putting myself out there and eating big things that I would not have eaten before. Five, a catalyst for stress that was not food. In my case, it was lifting weights. And number six, this is the last one that I didn't really mention, but is kind of present throughout the whole thing, is reminding myself that it was okay to fail. When I got to the point where I knew that I wanted to be in a different place than I was right now, and I would fail, as in I would like think about food way too much, or I would restrict something, I would always beat myself up, okay? And that would just make things worse. Like I went through this whole period of time where I was just staying in the same spot. I don't know what this is, but I would always stay at the same spot. I'd fail and I'd beat myself up. I'd fail, beat myself up, fail, beat myself up. So it was just like, man, it made it a whole lot worse to beat myself up on top of just me not being able, or me not realizing that I just needed a lot of time. And so once I started just letting myself say, hey, it's okay if I fail. I just need to take everything one step at a time, celebrate the small victories, pick myself back up, have my eyes on where I want to go, and take it one step at a time. Once I started letting myself be okay, knowing that I was going to fail down the line and be okay with that, I started really picking myself back up, focusing on all those other things, and just I kept on moving forward. I think the goal in all this is not to get rid of negative thoughts, but to change how we react to them. I experience negative thoughts every single day, and it's changed from food now to other things. I don't believe that my goal should be to just remove them altogether, because if I do that, I might find that I can never completely remove them. But instead of trying to completely remove them, which I can't necessarily control, I can control how I respond and how I react to those negative thoughts. There it is, the unclear path on how to develop a healthy relationship with food. Now, like I said before, this probably won't be the last video that I make on a topic like this, on developing peace with food. That right now is the clearest path that I can see in such an unclear topic, in such a topic that is so different and varying for every single person who's going through something like this. So if you're walking through this right now, if you're going through an eating disorder and you're struggling to find peace with food, if it's just like taking over, or it has taken over and you can't get over that hump, let me know either whether it's down in the comments below or if you want to message me privately on Instagram, message me. But I want to know kind of what you're going through and how you're working with it right now. And hey, if you're not working with it, that's totally fine. One step at a time, right? The more and more that I talk to people in this space, like I was messaging people on Instagram this past week, super good, super helpful. The more that I realize, the more we talk about this openly and also privately. Some people are comfortable with either, but the more we just talk about this, the better we all become, the closer we all get to becoming our best selves. So let's talk about it. Whether it's privately, message me on Instagram, or in the comments below, please let me know. I hope you found this topic helpful in some way. Hopefully there was like one small tidbit of something that you could either relate to or found helpful at all. If you're enjoying this stuff or other stuff that I'm putting out or have put out, please consider subscribing. I'd love to have you join the self-improvement, eating disorder awareness, depression, anxiety awareness crew. If you want to watch any other vids that I've put out recently, I'll probably put them here in the screen for you to watch. And if you don't want to watch it, that's totally fine. They're there for you to watch at any point in time. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.